Good evening, friends. Of course, I'm sure most of you know about this book, Living Wisely, Living Well. I have found this to be a wonderful book to promote as a gift. And recently, today, we actually did a workshop in a academy in Pune. And the interesting thing was we showed them some of our best-selling books. And even before we did our workshop today, they had already placed an order for more than 200 copies of different sorts. And sometimes that is also such a wonderful way to share these teachings that Swamiji and Master have written. So here's the quote of the day, May 2nd. There are two kinds of innocence, that of ignorance and that of wisdom. A little girl asked once by a little boy, "Are you a virgin?" Replied, "No, not yet." Hers was the innocence of ignorance. Such innocence may in time be undermined. The innocence of wisdom, however, follows upon the complete conquest of ego. Such innocence, though childlike, can never be undone. Its strength, though flexible, is indomitable. What a beautiful quote. Kriyananda ji, I've shared in the past, but I'm each time amazed when this opportunity comes to pick just a couple statements of his in this book and to elaborate on them. I have been amazed, friends, with the depth, the wisdom that has gone into these few lines. And of course, the story goes like this. He, as you know, must have heard, he worked on this book. It was first called Do It Now. Then he said he wasn't completely satisfied with the book and he worked on it again, and a few years later came up with Do It Well, the improved version. But even then he wasn't completely satisfied, and I think it was 2009. I remember in Pune when he was at least working on certain chapters, and he brought out the final version, called it Living Wisely, Living Well, and he says, this is what I really wanted to convey, and I'm so happy finally. He also mentioned that no other book has taken so much energy out of him. It's very interesting to someday meditate on that fact alone, how different people write books, what goes into writing that, and especially if your subject is each time slightly different, what consciousness do you have to touch or allow? How are your thoughts? How is your consciousness? And how does it reflect, of course, then in that book? So here he's talking about a very interesting topic, not often discussed, but visible, certainly very visible. When I read these lines, I said, how can I present this topic? And the first thought I had, on which I acted upon, was examples. So here we go, relax. Today we'll be sharing a lot of stories to see how some of the giants, shall I say, of the spiritual world have been extremely childlike. And they are giants, not because they were big physically, because they had such power of will, such power, shall I say, in their very words, in the truths they explained, that centuries later also they are standing the test of time. And you and I, when we read those lines of truth, those statements about their lives, this uplifting influence, this power comes to us. And but at the same time, like I said, Swami is making that point also, that he said it is an indomitable, which is to say impossible to overcome will, but it is flexible and their nature is childlike. So how does that work? Well, I would like to first start with, now of course, he in the beginning is talking about childhood basically. There are two little children who are having a conversation, and of course it doesn't require any stretch of thinking to know that children are innocents. Actually, if you, for that matter, look at any newborn, or in the sense, any living creature in its earlier few years, first few years, they are so lovable, they are so adorable, just their behavior. Sometimes I have this theory, I'm a doctor also, and each time reflecting that there's an energy reality, astral world, Master said, a causal world, and then we arrive over here in the physical reality. We forget the earlier ones. My mind naturally moves in that direction to think, how can I understand it better? and what must be happening in that transition. And one day this beautiful image came to my mind, which I think to some degree must be true, but see what you think about it. Little children, animals, everything that arrives by birth in this world is kind of lumpy, you know. Children are all roundish, their eyes and cheeks and throat and everything is merging, their fingers are merging into one another. And of course, as we spend more and more time here, we become more well defined, you know, everything gets its characteristic shape and function. But don't they arrive, and they come from an energy reality, Master said, where things are amorphous, or shall I say they are more united, more unitive. The consciousness is more together, here it is more separated. And of course, our features compared to then when we were infants are so well defined now. At that time, we all look like one blob of, you know, flesh and fat. So similarly, I was thinking that, so we can see that innocence at that time is of a certain kind. We are learning the things. Here the children clearly did not know what was the question. They must have probably heard it somewhere. And what was the appropriate answer? What does it even mean? And Swami is saying such kind of innocence can be undermined, can be often lost. It does happen as we move into the world. We forget those moments when we were so new in this plane, or let's say sometimes in a neighborhood, that our faith, actually it is our faith, not so much our size, which makes us likable. We just have that innocence about everything we are seeing around us. But then, shall I say, on the other side, extreme of life, because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I will come to most people towards the end of their life. And people do say that we become a child all over again in old age. That was a line from Padre Pio. But it is true, friends, when we study the life of a saint, there is something about them which is extremely remarkable, yet there is deep innocence. What does innocence mean? Just the complete absence of guile, complete absence of hurt or any malice over there. And that comes, Swami is saying, when the ego is completely relinquished. Of course, we will come to the discussion how the ego can be relinquished. But what are such examples? First thought that came was of Ramakrishna Paramahansa. We all know he was the only other great avatar, you know, who was born in India, in the world, in recent times, apart from our line of masters. And Master Swamiji had deep respect for him. He brought such a universal, unitive message of religion. And one time, when he was, you know, at Dakshineshwar, and he was the priest of the temple over there, the queen who had given him that position and the temple to take charge of, came there. She respected him very much. And she came there to pray and offer, you know, her darshan to the murti over there of Divine Mother. And as they began praying, just a few moments into the prayer, completely out of the blue, Ramakrishna, you know, he landed a big slap on the cheek of the queen. And seeing this, everybody over there was aghast, and some of them were even ready to give this man a good lesson, till Rani Rasamai said, oh no, don't do anything. He has done the right thing. And later she explained that she was sitting there. She had come for a special prayer. But even in that brief period, her mind was wandering, and Ramakrishna knew that. And you might say, as the priest, he was doing his job. How he did it, he would know best, and the queen would know best why it was good for her to receive that lesson in such a way, such an extreme way. But he was as a friend, as a guide, as a fellow devotee, telling her, focus. And of course, the moment others heard that, they respected him. Their respect for such a person who knew them inside out deeply grew. And it was not like he made a big fuss about it. He slapped her and immediately went back to his prayer and to fulfill and finish that arti that he was doing. Another example is similar, is that of Guru Nanak. When Guru Nanak was young, you know, he started having this beautiful awakening. He thought God wants to act through him, which was true. And seeing his behavior, his preaching was contrary to the times of the ruler who was a Mughal king at that time. And Guru Nanak was gaining more and more fame. And one day the minister of this king's court, he was quite upset, and he said, so we must stop this. He's preaching something which is against our religion. And he said, what solution do you have? He said, let's ask him to become converted. by doing our namaz, by doing our prayer. Now the king initially was reluctant. He said, it's not required. I have a liking for this fellow. He's not disturbing us. Do you really think such an extreme step is required? He may not like it after all. He said, no, sir, let's do it. If he's our friend, as he claims to be everybody's friend, he will comply. Well, you think it's a tricky situation. So Guru Nanak said, of course I'll come. And he came, and the namaz, the prayer started, and as their rituals went about, the prayer, the namaz ended. And the minister said, look, he brought everybody's attention. He said, tells the king, he claims to be your friend, sir, but he did not do the namaz the way we were doing it. Ask him why. And when the king said, why didn't you do it when you said you would come and join us? He said, sir, I think I did the namaz. But I think he said, first of all, you didn't do the namaz. He said, you were thinking of the horses for which you've paid the gold coins and they haven't yet arrived. And you, Mr. Minister, were thinking all the time of the calf that your pregnant cow, or I think the horse, is about to deliver. So he said, I was very much doing the namaz, but I think you both were somewhere else. Childlike, quite innocent. Yet, think of the power that can not just do its own work, but also carry with it the consciousness of its enemies or its well-wishers. And on similar lines, friends, all great masters prove. And this is on one level, it's a mystery, because to our human mind, we need all the strength, all the energy to focus on that one thing we are trying to do. And here is somebody whose consciousness is so far away. Their ways are so different that sometimes, I think all the time, it requires a few years to go by. It requires a growth in our own consciousness. It's like Master said, you will know a saint when you have become one. That you can only understand their nature, their consciousness, the motive, if there is such a thing. I think those are always divine motives behind a saint's behavior when we have become one. At the same time, they are so human in their interaction. I am thinking of Master, for example. He was not an aloof yogi. He would communicate with people. He was living with them. He would give them advice on how to fill potholes, how to deliver their lectures, how the cleanliness should be kept, how are people doing, their parents, relatives. And Master said some people would say that, oh, these people, talking about his ashram, they don't practice real spirituality. And Master says that's because they were not practicing it themselves, and they would lay the blame on the kind of outward life we would have. But he was not trying to make a show of his inward realization, consciousness outwardly. But there was a time when somebody died, and it was only after the person died that Yogananda ji received a response from Divine Mother to go and help the person, and he did. And later on the person said, but sir, I called you even before when my wife was still alive and suffering. Why didn't you come then? He said, because Divine Mother told me not to go at that time. So see, again, to be able to hold that conversation outwardly, but inwardly to always ask Divine Mother, what do you want? Because there is an absence of ego in the saints, and they are here to fulfill, above all, God's will. And you might say they are trying to pull or make evolve the God who is sleeping in you and me. Another beautiful thought is, Master always wanted, he had predicted in the last few, I think, months, perhaps even years, the timing and the manner of his passing. He said, I would like to go through a heart attack with my boots on, speaking about my America, my India, and so many, you might say, conditions which in general understanding, they would seem like, okay, let's see how much of this is literal, how much is not. But I think we all know all of this proved quite literal. Master did die with a heart attack. He chose that way to go. He died. He left his body the moment he finished the poem, My India. And of course, he was awake, alert, serving people. He had met so many. He had told many he would be, perhaps leaving his body. He had fulfilled his life work. Just a week before he passed away, Kriyananda ji had an opportunity to ask him, because Master was reminding his disciples that he may leave the body. And Swami said, but sir, you had seen this vision in Ranchi where thousands of Americans, Western faces you saw. Have they all come? And Master said, almost all. 2 or 3 are left. And Swami says, just in that last week, 2, 3 people came, and it was just like Master had touched. He had fulfilled the work, the mission God gave him, and he left. But again, friends, think of the will, which he was not expressing. I am choosing to go leave my body. Now this is my will. I'm going to push everybody else's will aside. Nothing of that sort. It was as if our little wills are part of this great will of Master, of God, of our Guru, whoever we try to attune to. Whatever reality you focus on, you become one almost to different degrees with that reality. And those who were with Master, his will certainly was not thwarted by them, but their own will was challenged, streamlined, moved further according to the speed, or I should say the proximity they had to his consciousness. One lesson I myself got, in trying to see how Kriyananda ji operated towards the end of his life was, he would often give a small talk or, do repeated episodes of video recording, and in between he would ask people, what do you think of this? And he would take feedback, he would listen to them, he was very thankful. He would include it many times in the immediate recording. And I was thinking, sir, you must be knowing the best response to how to improve, let's say, something, how to reflect on it. And I thought, my goodness, he is so generous. He is involving everybody's thoughts and ideas. And is this not diluting his own thought process? Another time I remember somebody said, sir, we can give a lecture in a big university in Pune. And Swami says, I would very much like to do that. Let's do it. And again, this thought came in my mind. My goodness, is he saying yes to just about any offer that is coming by, how does this work? How is his life laid out? Normally we think he would lay out his life or God has laid it out. But again, friends, I saw that. It didn't take much time to see wherever he went, because he had no ego motivation, no thwarting cross currents of ego. It's as if the universe realigned itself. And the right people came. Of course, it would help the instruments who were part of such a process. People who would come there, they would say, I was just waiting for such a thing. You answered a question. Thank you for your presence, your darshan. So many things. So on one level, again, we are in a physical reality. Things are separated. Our bodies, we are separated from yesterday and tomorrow by this day, time, space. These are all creating fragments, seeming fragments in our consciousness, and the masters show how God's will is the supreme thing. It is not a random universe. Swami used to say, life is not meaningless. There is such meaning that if we are not on that wavelength, we think, oh, once in 3 months a miracle does happen in my life, because we wake up once in 3 months. Swami says miracles were a part of Master's daily life because his consciousness was so unitive and so high. I want to share another very interesting story that was told to me by a gentleman in Pune. He had come, I think 2-3 years before Swami left his body. He had tried to come and came to one of the lectures in Pune of Swamiji. But he was put off by a few things, maybe Swami would talk of difficult times and such, and the person was slightly put off. And something didn't work out for him anyway. We had hoped to meet after the talk, and I wanted to introduce him to many people. Anyway, he left, never answered my phone for a long time. Later I came to know he was not happy, and our worlds were not such that we were living together. So he was elsewhere. We would connect once in a few months for work. And I tried to tell him, come one more time and see, meet people, interact, and maybe your perception about us will change. And, you don't want to push people, so I let it be. But then one day, this was 2013, I think, sometime, at around 10 p.m., I saw 4 missed calls from this gentleman. And I, being a doctor, sometimes, people call me in times of crisis, if they need help or guidance. I immediately called back and he was so happy. He said, ho, guess who I met this evening in Phoenix Mall, which is the biggest mall we have in Pune. I said, who did you meet? He said, I met Swami Kriyananda. And I said, really? Swamiji is going to take a morning flight to Delhi. How did you meet him in the mall? He said, that's what. I was shopping there in all places. Of all places, in Zara, I saw Kriyananda ji he was trying to buy a jacket, and he said, I went up to him. He also knew Swamiji's then assistant, Shurjo, and he said, I just went up to him, greeted him. Shurjo introduced Swamiji to this gentleman. And Swami extended his hand. He said, I'm so happy to meet you. And this gentleman was so happy. And that was Swami's last, you might say, evening in Pune. Morning he flew to Delhi, I think, or maybe Kolkata anyway, and then he was going to other things, and of course he left his body a few months later. But what struck me was, again, the law of magnetism, that between millions of people, in the span of 2-3 years that went by, here was somebody who was keen. There was some misunderstanding. Now, yes, some misunderstanding, some distances that we create, our egoic delusions create, it can create a chasm of many lifetimes. Master once said to a disciple, I lost touch with you for a few lifetimes, but I will never lose touch again. What a precious promise. And similarly, I thought that here was a man who wasn't sure, and of all people in this big city, of all places you would imagine to find a Swami, a spiritual leader, he was right there, he met the gentleman, and it must have helped that person so much. Again, to speak of when you're childlike, when there is no ego, friends, we are doing the will of God. God being the Heavenly Father, the Divine Mother, our best friend, He knows exactly what is right for you and me. So how do we overcome this ego? Well, first of all, we have to be willing that it's like a shirt which we loved at one point, but has now grown, we have overgrown the size. We need to take it out, replace it with something else. We need to come out of this egoic limited self-definition. We are not the ego. We operate through it. We have to utilize it to overcome it. And likewise with the body, likewise with the family where we are born, the country we live, the gender we possess in this lifetime. And that actually is the beginning of yoga. It's not one of the new discoveries. Of course, deeper perceptions come as we practice meditation. But Master said that when Patanjali said, now we come to the study of yoga, he said, before that, one has to come to the understanding ideally that I am tired of this, which is Sankhya philosophy. I want to know who I really am. I want to move into that direction. And then the masters can really, rub their hands and say, okay, I'm willing to help you. I can bring you to that point of innocence, to that point of being truly a child of God. Swamiji said that's the only definition we are allowed to use. He said, you can say I'm a disciple of Master and such, I'm a Kriyaban, but not really, You're a disciple, which means Chela. I'm a divine child of my Guru. I'm a divine child of God. And that means to be open to His guidance, to never lose faith in that, through meditation, through our practices, through discrimination, through our prayers, to always say, expand my little self into, expand my mind, expand my ability to understand, my perceptions, to what you really want me to see. And then we will see this amazing thing, because I have seen that often when I ask for prayers from acharyas and some guru bhais, I go for the one who are the quietest, because I know that they have no self-desires, and often the prayers of such people, their wishes, I'm slightly over time, but I'll take one more minute over here, friends. Recently we went to Ajanta and Ellora. It was a beautiful trip, many guru bhais. Again, it may seem like a random thought somebody had, we went there, but it was not like that. One of our members, our senior acharyas, said, when we asked him, this was at the very end of the trip, he said, oh yes, I was thinking of coming here for about 50 years when I was in college. Because I did the math, I said, wow, that was 50 years ago or more. And he said it was a random thought. And just a week before we went there, a gentleman walked into our temple. I said, where are you from, sir? How can I help you? He said, I'm from Ajanta. Now, Ajanta, caves are known. Ajanta, the town, has perhaps 10,000, 5,000 people, I think at the most. But he was one of the wealthiest people there. He took care of us. Our entire tour was arranged by him through the best guides. The food was arranged. The transportation was taken care of. We went to their house. His father actually was the security in charge of Ajanta caves. What I'm trying to say is Divine Mother is unseen many times, but her miracles cannot be missed if we keep our hearts and our eyes open, that she's always taking care of those children who have surrendered the ego to say, Mother, what is thy will? How would you like to utilize me? Because that is the only reality, friends. God made us. When we finally turn to Him, not only in the big things, but in all the small things, He, she will make us know that we are her child, their child, they are taking care of us. And who can injure one whose parent, is God? So such is their will, such is their demonstration. God bless you. Thank you so much for this evening. And let's move in that direction of offering our little self to receive God's true gifts for us.